presentation was given at the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet at a training for construction engineers. They had a construction manager academy, and I was contacted by Mr. Criswell, who was director at the time, and he asked me to put something together on ethics. And so we had a discussion, and what he was driving towards more than anything is teaching the construction managers how to represent the state of Kentucky, the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and the Transportation Cabinet, and represent the owner's viewpoint in the field as they're doing the construction management. And you don't have to be around very long to know of some missteps by folks in the field that perhaps they needed to consider ethics and fairness and truth. But as I talked to Mr. Criswell more, what he was really driving at is the inspectors out there in the field have a spec book, and the spec book is a legal document, but it is policy. And so it represented the majority of the cases, and he wanted to raise up good resident engineers, good inspectors, good technicians that would recognize the exceptions and be able to make the exception in the field instead of taking it up higher to get approval. But he also wanted them to recognize when they needed to take it up the chain for approval. So that's kind of where this is coming from. And so with that, I'll start the presentation. So several years ago, and when I'm going to mention names here in a few minutes, or a few seconds. Several years ago, there was a study on ethics, and the group of people were brought in. They were given a list of names, and the list of names were famous people easily recognized. And the people in the group were told to look at the names and then rank the people as to who on the list they thought exhibited the most ethical behavior. So the results were fairly consistent. On that list was a gentleman by the name of Dennis Rodman. If you've been watching the Michael Jordan special, he's been back in the spotlight, but this was during the time when he was actively playing basketball. He was ranked kind of low as far as ethical behavior. President Clinton was president at the time of this study. He was ranked somewhere in the middle, and up towards the top was Mother Teresa and the Pope. And routinely, out of all the respondents, there was another person that found his or her name up towards the top, because on the list of people at the very end, there was a simple word, and it's a pronoun, and it was you. So how do you rank yourself in ethical behavior and as compared to the rest of the people on the list? And everyone ranked themselves high. If I had time to do a poll here, and would wonder how you would rank yourself as far as your ethics. I want you to think of yourself as ethically responsible. But the researchers say that we all have a self-bias and that we think we are ethical. And so my subtext here, I am responsible. What I want to drive home in the next 30 minutes or so is that we are responsible, and ethics is something that I feel like we should struggle with, because very, very often the right way is not known easily. Calvin and Hobbes is some of my favorite philosophy. As I start out, I want you to know that I'm a devout Christian, and that colors my discussion of ethics. but I definitely don't want to come off as too preachy. I think a lot of discussions on ethics end up getting burdensome and preachy with rules and laws and thou shalt. But my friend Calvin says, made in God's own image, yes, sir. And Hobbes says, God must have a goofy sense of humor. I don't want you to think because I'm teaching this ethics discussion that I've got it all figured out. In fact, in transparency, if you all remember and went to the University of Kentucky and took engineering ethics, there was a gentleman, Dr. Cheeks, that taught that class. And I have to confess now, I cheated in ethics class. So I definitely don't have this figured out. Don't put me on a pedestal. Dr. Cheeks was known to use the same test semester after semester after semester. So I had the old tests. I didn't study the book like I should for tests. I studied the old test, and by the way, I got an A in the class. But now I've carried that burden for a long time. Jeff Dick, I saw you out there. You and I were in class together. I cheated in ethics class, so don't think I have this thing figured out. At the same time, I really enjoy teaching this ethics class. It's good for me to go over this material over and over and over. And I really do think I've got some thoughts here that I hope that you realize are good for you. So my friend Calvin says, everybody I know needs what I'm selling, and he's selling a swift kick in the butt for $1. So metaphorically, I hope this is a swift kick to all of us to challenge us in our area of ethics. So real quick, ethics defined is just moral principles. It deals with the concept of right or wrong. And as we get started here, how have you thought of yourself and your ethics? And I'll tell several years ago, my wife and I were having a get-together, a large get-together at our house. And it was going to be outside. So that day I spent time in the yard doing every imaginable chore, mowing, weeding, mulching, everything. So finished up the day, and before the party, I went into the house, and I was so dirty and so filthy that I went straight to the laundry room, disrobed in the laundry room, left my dirty clothes there, wrapped myself in a robe, and then went to the shower. Had a great party that night. It was wonderful. So the next day, I went into the laundry room, and I was hit with this horrible, horrible smell. And you probably realize now, as I say, there was a smell. The smell was my clothes that I had left, and more accurately, that smell was me. So, have you ever gotten downwind of yourself to check yourself in your moral principles? It's very common for us to say we believe in a morality, in a right or wrong, yet when it comes to the exception, we very easily forgive ourselves and hold on to that thought as we go through these. More of an ethics definition, we think it's how we should behave or standards that we hold ourselves to or how we treat others. But it drives to the point of what defines right or wrong behavior. And this is the rub. What I may think is right or wrong, others may disagree. Let me give you a very, very extreme example. I would think that flying an airplane into a large building, the World Trade Center, with intent to kill people is extremely wrong behavior. But the fellows that flew those airplanes and millions who would claim to be of their religion disagree. They actually thought they were doing the right behavior. Now, again, I said that was an extreme case. But while I hope, I would think that the people on this webinar, that we could agree on right and wrong behavior the majority of the time. There will be times when we won't agree. So let's think of a not so extreme case. Is it okay to drive faster than the speed limit? If it's not, why not? I saw Stacy Tamal, formerly of traffic operations. Now she's in permits, but I wonder, Stacy, if you want to type in your chat, is it right or wrong from your opinion? And I'll go ahead and go out on a limb and say, hey, I think we shouldn't. And then I also confess that I do routinely drive over the speed limit. I quickly forgive myself and others because in my mind, the speed limit is a guidance, not a law.
Casey says wrong.
I wondered if she would. So I wonder, Stacy, do you or your husband drive over the speed limit? The point is this: I don't want to fixate on the speed limit issue, but how quickly we are to forgive ourselves when we rationalize that a wrong behavior in somebody else's eyes, it's okay for me. So what I'm introducing here is that sometimes there are gray areas. And I'm driving towards ethical dilemmas. I do think that sometimes, because right or wrong is difficult to define, that some people just give up on it and say, well, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And, they rationalize their way into their behavior and do kind of whatever they think is right. They have no governing principles. I want to say, just because ethics is sometimes hard to define, don't dismiss the challenge of ethics in trying to figure out right and wrong. Don't use this as an excuse to dismiss ethics, because there is right and wrong. I do believe in moral absolutes, and as I talk to the construction engineers, I say, there's no right way to do a wrong thing. Just because there's grayness, you need to wrestle with it. Take time to sort out the answer, and be responsible. You are responsible. And more on that later, but here's a visual aid. What do you do when all signs of an ethical dilemma are telling you to go to the left, but the situation itself feels like you should go to the right? The letter of the law is something we're going to talk about here, but we also have to feel out the context of the situation. If you feel like the situation should be you go right and everything is pointing left, what do you do? And I'm going to give you some suggestions as to what I do. This whole presentation is really about ethical dilemmas. I don't believe a 30, 45-minute presentation is going to convince you to not do wrong if you are doing wrong now. I also don't think this presentation is going to suddenly make you do right if you don't do right now. But maybe, just maybe, I can challenge you in looking at the complex situations. And when there's a conflict between two moral imperatives, to think through and go with the best one in these ethical dilemma situations. So when we find ourselves in ethical dilemmas, what do we do? A reporter one time asked Muhammad Ali how many sit-ups he did every day. And he responded in true Ali fashion. He doesn't count his sit-ups. He only starts counting when it starts to hurt, when he felt the pain, because that's when it really mattered. I feel that that the best ethical people focus their energies in the gray areas, and then that their strength of their ethics really occur in the ethical dilemmas, not when something is obviously right or wrong. So that's what we're going to talk about. So when you find yourself in these gray areas, I'm going to give you 3 questions. If you want to write these down, I'm going to talk about each one of these 3 and define them a little better. But we're going to talk about 3 ethics check questions. So when we come to those ethical dilemmas and we have a decision, the alternatives that we're thinking of, ask if that alternative is legal, ask if the alternative is balanced, and then ask how will it make you feel about yourself should you choose alternative A versus alternative B. And let's talk about, is it legal? I talk on this one the most because it, to me, is the most challenging of those areas. Is it legal? So legality can come in the form of different categories here. We have criminal law, civil law, company policy, a code of ethics, and the is it legal question, it really is the lowest form of ethical conduct. Laws were written to capture the minimum acceptable behavior. So if you are obeying all the laws, that's a good thing. We should. But are you pushing yourself to the highest ethical standard simply by following the law? Now let's talk about each one of those 4 areas of law that I discussed. Criminal law obviously deals with crime. You got examples of burglary, assault, even murder. I don't know about you, but I'm staying away from criminal law. I don't have any desire to have a debate whether my actions were criminal or not. So hopefully we've got this area under control, and right or wrong is easily black or white in this area. We also have a civil law. Now, criminal law you can go to jail for. Civil law is civil offenses, so it has to do about relationships between members of the community. So you could have property damage or a breach of contract, domestic violence, still some things that are black and white, not as much gray. But there is a hierarchy here. In my past, I have actually broken civil law. Back when I was a dumb teenager, we damaged some housing when we went rolling. That's what the people in Somerset call throwing toilet paper up in the trees and houses and things. So, but this is a lower level of laws. Sometimes we creep over into breaking these. We shouldn't, perhaps, but we do. And then a policy. Company policy is guidelines. And so examples of the dress code, time and attendance, work guidance documents. This is to maintain an order and consistency in the workplace. It's for the organization to work well together, but just guidelines. And then a code of ethics. Code of ethics is something that's very personal, I think. Code of ethics is something that you have to adopt and agree to. So engineers have a code of ethics that we swear to when we get our professional engineer license. This is codes of conduct and professional codes of professional practice. So back to thinking more globally, when we ask, is it legal? We also need to ask, is it practice, is it policy, or is it law? practice helps guide us, but it's not binding. Policy, it helps guide us as well. It's a little bit more solid than simple practice because the policy is written down and should be followed in the majority of the cases. But there are exceptions to policy, and that's what we would want to come out of this discussion is how do you recognize exceptions to the policy and when to deviate from the policy. Now, if it is actual law, now laws are getting binding, are binding, and the letter of the law versus spirit of the law, we definitely want to follow the letter and the spirit of the law. So let's talk about the letter of the law versus spirit of the law. Letter of the law just means obeying the literal interpretation of the words. So, therefore it's called the letter of the law. The intent may be different sometimes than the letter of the law. And the intent is what we would call more the spirit of the law. It's very, very difficult to convey thought with words and make sure that the person reading it truly understands it the way the author intended it to be. But to me, the higher ethical standard here is to work to understand the spirit of the law and follow that spirit of the law. I also am trying to understand the letter of the law as well. I don't want my ethics to be challenged because for some reason the letter of the law was broken. But let me give you this. Maybe this will help you understand me. I know of many, I know some contractors, let's say, that follow the letter of the law, the letter of the policy of the spec book, and yet they don't follow the intent of the spec. They don't follow the spirit of the spec. And I would say that the folks that follow the letter and then exploit loopholes or technicalities or language that's not clear, I would say that even though they're following the letter of the law, I consider them some of the most unethical people that I know. And it's the intent behind why they're doing what they're doing. In the majority of cases that I'm thinking of, they're following the letter of the law and exploiting the letter of the law. They're doing it for personal gain. They're not doing it for the overall good. And that's the reason that I'm saying that I feel like they are some of the most unethical people that I know. Usually when we taught this lesson in the Construction Manager Academy, I would say to the inspectors, does this make sense? And universally, everybody says yes. They had all run up against that contractor that knew the spec book perhaps even better than the inspectors did, and used it to their advantage and bent it to their company instead of knowing and going by the spirit. So we followed this up with our inspectors with saying we really should not engage in any action that is or gives the appearance of being improper, illegal, or immoral. We truly do not want to do that as a cabinet. I truly don't want to do that as an engineer or just as a person in my community. So back to my friends Calvin and Hobbes to help me make the point. Calvin says, Hobbes, do you think morality is defined by our action or by what's in our hearts? And Hobbes says, I think our actions show what's in our hearts. And Hobbes thinks about it a little bit, and then he says, I resent that. That's what I'm saying. I think if our hearts truly want to be known for and have high morality, that our actions will show it. So, as part of our reasonable standard, I want to give you some points here, some guidance as to when to deviate from a policy or a guide, or even when to deviate from the spec book. First, don't deviate for personal gain. Only deviate for common good. So you can gain something out of this, but this should be a win-win situation for all parties involved. Don't just do it for your own gain. Second helpful hint here that I have when you're thinking about deviating from a policy or guidance and still remaining ethical is, this is a metaphor, but you backcite the benchmarks. Those of you who know surveying know that the benchmark has a very, very high accuracy. And a surveyor, as he or she is going through and surveying points, will occasionally backcite the benchmark to hold down the errors and increase accuracy. So as an example of this, if there's a particular spec that the contractor comes and says, hey, I'm going to make up a number, everybody, just for illustration, but that the contractor comes in and says, hey, this says this should be 10 or higher, but in this particular case, we're getting 8 and we think it's okay. So, and here are the reasons that we think the number 8 is okay versus 10 or higher. And you look at the spec book, and the spec book does say 10 or higher, but you agree with the rationale that this is an exception. So you let the contractor go forward with 8. All right. Fast forward to another situation. If that same contractor comes back to you and says, hey, remember the situation we had where we used 8? Well, now we want to use 6. That's kind of stretching the rules too far. You don't go back to the exception, you go back to the rule. And that's the backside of the benchmark. If they come forward with doing 6 when the spec book says 10 or higher, you may want to say, well, no, last time we did 8, we stretched it, remember? So we need to backside a benchmark. And then this one is very important. If you're hiding decisions, that should be bells and whistles to ourselves that we may be in an unethical territory. We should be accountable to those around us. So as we find those exceptions, not only do we should document them, and more on that later, but we should talk to them, to talk about them with others. Talk to peers, definitely talk to bosses, even talk to subordinates and see what they think. I think the more everybody knows, the better, and then work hard to make sure that you say, now this is an exception, but here's why I think it is an exception. What do you think? So be accountable to those around you. All right. When I started off with the ethics check, I mentioned 3 questions. And the first one was, is it legal? And we've talked about that a lot. And as I said, that one to me is the most complex. The second ethics question that we need to think as we confront a decision that doesn't have an obvious right answer is we need to think about the alternatives and ask about the alternative. Is it balanced? So this is about promoting fairness. Is it fair to all concerned in the short term as well as the long term? And the really smart people talk about exceptions as promoting a win-win. We have to get to the win-win relationship. And if we do, then the alternative we're choosing is balanced. So one of the resources I had writing this presentation was the elements of ethics, and they dove deeply into how to balance our decisions to make sure that everybody gets to the win-win. So they talked about these 5 things: doing no harm, making sure that dignity is afforded to all, benefits everyone, and definitely as we do this, we want to exercise caution and care for others, seeking fairness, promoting the autonomy, being faithful, delivering our best, and making the ethical decisions as we try to balance everything out. And the third question of our ethics check is to me the most important one, and this is, how does it make us feel about ourselves? If you can project yourself into the future and think, well, if I choose alternative B, will I be proud of that decision? Will I be able to talk to my friends and family and feel good about it? Will I be able to sleep at night? And then this question is known by many DOT people. I think they start telling you this question as soon as you walk in the door. If your actions as you represent the DOT were reported in tomorrow's newspaper, how would you feel about that? And to me, that's an excellent question to ask when you get into ethical dilemmas. So the three questions: is it legal, is it balanced, and how would it make me feel about myself? I want to give you a test case. And this test case is a real story, happened many years ago at DOT. This is in the time before cell phones and ease of communication. And it was during a really large snowstorm in Pike County. And KYTC snowplow driver was pushing snow and came upon a stranded motorist. The motorist was still in his car, but it was extremely cold, as you might recognize when the snow falls. It gets very cold out, and this was even below zero cold at that time. And there is a policy, and it's a very strict policy at KYTC, that citizens of the Commonwealth are not allowed to be in Commonwealth of Kentucky vehicles. There is a tremendous liability there for the Commonwealth if something were to happen, a crash or something, and a citizen be injured, then the Commonwealth of Kentucky would be liable. And the cabinet, KYTC, is so serious about this that you can lose your job if you put a citizen into a car owned by the Commonwealth of Kentucky. So again, stranded motorist, extreme cold, their vehicle was not working, and the snowplow driver had a decision to make. So according to the snowplow driver, they knew that it was against KYTC policy. So they asked their question, is it legal? And according to policy, and again, a very strict policy, they knew they should not allow the stranded motorist into the truck cab of the snowplow. But then they asked, is it balanced? If they left the motorist stranded, it doesn't promote a win-win for them. In fact, it may even be deadly for them. But if the motorist came into the cab and the snowplow driver took them a few miles to the nearest store, that would be a win-win for both. And then the snowplow driver definitely asked himself, how would it make me feel? He was reported in saying that he just didn't feel right about leaving the person stranded. So he told the person to get into the cab of the truck and drove them a few miles to the nearest store. He did report it to his bosses, and believe it or not, KYTC gave that gentleman a certificate award. And they did it because he recognized an exception. He knew the rule, but he realized that in this particular case, in this particular context, the rule wasn't balanced and would not let him he wouldn't feel well about himself if he left it. So they applauded that, and they said, sometimes the most difficult thing is not deciding what's right, but rather doing it. And this gentleman very quickly recognized that he should pick up the stranded motorist, and he had the courage to do it. And when asked, you could have lost your job about that, and he said, yeah, but if I'd left that person there and something had happened to them, I would have just felt horrible. So he had the courage to do it. Charlie Raymer is one of my heroes, and I quote him here. There has to be a way for us to do the right thing, so have the courage to do it. And I'm wrapping up with 4 key concepts, and then we'll be done with our time here. But when it comes to ethical dilemmas, and when it comes to the dilemmas in your work, I'm going to give you 4 key concepts to help you manage it. And the first concept is be consistent. Now, as an example, if you are a construction inspector, and let's say you've got a couple of jobs going on with 2 different contractors, and contractor A is one of your favorites. You really like working with them, but contractor B is one you struggle with. You're challenged to work with them well. You have to be consistent in how you treat both of them, regardless of how that makes you feel. So if contractor A wants to do something, and then contractor B wants to do the same thing, if you deem it appropriate, they both should be allowed to do it. Now, there is one exception to this, and that's if you realize that you made a mistake. So if you made an exception for contractor A, and then you come to realize that you probably shouldn't have done that. When contractor B comes along and he says, well, you let that fellow do it, then you need to say, you know what, I shouldn't have, and I'm not going to allow it anymore. So there would be consistency from that time forward as you learned your lesson. So that's key concept number 1. Key concept number 2 is having a legitimate business reason for every decision. You want to think through the rationality and even document the rationality of your decisions. And that's pretty self-explanatory, I think. So I've said several times, document events, and this is key. This is a lot easier now than it has been in the past. Nearly everyone has an iPad. I dare say everyone has some sort of smartphone, and so you can just take a few minutes if you're on a construction site and very quickly type yourself a note or even email it to you, and they'll have a timestamp. But make sure you document those events. And the last of the concept is if you're in doubt, call an expert. So in a particular situation where your knowledge about a construction activity may not be very full yet, and the contractor is asking for an exception in a particular area, have some people on speed dial that you can call that are experts and talk it through with them and reach a consensus with that expert. And then that's how you gain knowledge on exceptions and the rules. So when in doubt, call an expert. So as I wrap up, I don't think morality happens by accident. I think it's a virtue that is acquired. And I think it's our responsibility to pursue that virtue. I think it's our responsibility to be ethical. And in the area of business management, follow those policies and those guides when it makes sense to. But in hopefully rare exceptions, and sometimes there are quite a few exceptions, but hopefully in the rare exceptions, when all the signs are pointing left, but the road's going to the right. Take that right turn. Be transparent to everyone. Document it, and then learn from it. And so hopefully this has challenged you a little bit. I appreciate your time so much. Janet, appreciate technology transfer and the opportunity to speak today.